Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, December 2nd around here, and we got to get to a lot of stuff. We have a ton of stuff to get to. We got two big-time upsets to start with. Michigan tops Ohio State again, and Miami falls out of the ACC title and maybe even the CFP as well. Then we'll get to a couple of ranked matchups from this week. Texas and South Carolina get big-time wins. Then we'll get to a little talk around all the different rivalries of the weekend. We got UGA kind of surviving in 8 overtimes. Notre Dame kind of survives USC just a little bit. And then you have Bama and Oregon kind of handling their business in big-time rivalries. We'll get to a little bit of Power 4 roundup, a ton of stuff to get to, including Penn State getting into the Big Ten Championship, Tennessee likely punching their ticket to the CFP, and much more. And then we'll get to the Group of 5. We'll talk about all the different matchups that are going on up there, and then we'll give you guys a little bit of update of all the championship matchups we have coming up this upcoming weekend. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that. Also, GSMCpodcast.net is up and running and does the exact same thing if you'd like to utilize that. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, because we had a crazy weekend. There's no doubt about that. And we had two teams that kind of fell in the CFP race and definitely fell out of their conference title games. And we'll start with that one that happened over there in Columbus, Ohio, because how did this happen? I genuinely don't know what to say about this Ohio State team at this point in this game, because they just don't show up the right way. For whatever reason, I don't know what's happening in that locker room. I don't know what's happening with Ryan Day and the way they're going about this game. It's not right. There's no two ways about that. It's one of those things that is very, very odd to me. Every single year that they show up, it just feels like Michigan wants it more. It feels like they work a little bit harder. It feels like they push a little bit harder, and they tend to come out on top. And they have the last 4 years, and more than anything, it felt like it's something that I saw Tom Fornelli say. It's something that a lot of people have kind of echoed. It feels like Ryan Day wants to prove something in this game every single year. When they get into this game, it feels like the offensive attack really changes from the past couple of games or from the rest of the season, where they really want to run the ball. They really want to push it in between the tackles, because they've been told time and time again that they can't handle Michigan physically, and they're going to get pushed around and this, that, and the other. And it feels like they're overcompensating in the other direction. They're not utilizing the thing that makes them really special, which is guys like Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and all of the guys they have on the outside. That is what makes Ohio State Ohio State. That is what makes Ohio State different from what Michigan is, or from what a lot of teams out there are. But for whatever reason, in this game, they feel like they have to prove something. They feel like they have to show that they can handle them physically, that they can meet Michigan where Michigan likes to play, which is run the ball, play a little bit of line of scrimmage play, and then control the time of possession. You're probably not going to beat Michigan at that. That's what they do. They're not really going away from that. Now, the quarterback coming in, we'll talk about him a little bit later in the week, but the quarterback coming in could change that. But the reality is, you're not doing that right now. They got guys on both sides of the line of scrimmage that are going to play really hard. You have a banged-up offensive line, and they didn't play like it. They played like they had the best offensive line in the country, like they were going to win the Joe Moore Award, like it wasn't even a question, and they had been running the ball really efficiently the entire year. That was not the case. They've been running the ball well the entire year, but they also had 2 injuries on their offensive lines throughout this year, including last week to Seth McLaughlin, and they didn't play like it. And it was the most confusing way to go about business that I've seen in quite some time. Every single time, you felt like Ohio State understood that you're probably not going to be able to run the ball in this game. You're probably not going to be able to get down the field that way. They would run the ball again, and they would do it over and over and over again, and they did take some shots outside, and Will Howard made his fair share of mistakes, not necessarily taking any pressure or flack off of the passing game, but all this to say, they weren't running the ball in this game. They were not getting close to being able to run the ball in this game, and they just kept doing it, and they kept committing to this idea that they have to prove everyone wrong, they have to show everyone that they're tough, instead of just winning the football game. And I think that's something that's been holding them back in this game for the last 4 years, and it's going to continue to until they figure out what's going on in this one and how they want to fix it. But overall, I mean, it was just 60 minutes where Michigan won the day. Once again, for the 4th year in a row, they won the day. And after the game, they had the scuffle that went on, a lot of blame to go around in that. I feel like it's not really much worth spending too much time on. But more than anything, Ohio State had about 60 minutes to make sure that they didn't plant that flag in the middle of their field. So that's kind of period, end of story. Obviously, plenty of blame to go around to all the teams and a lot of different people in that situation. But at the end of the day, Ohio State, you had something to say about it, and you didn't during the game. But how Michigan was able to do this, I mean, the D-line absolutely dominated. It was something we talked about going into this game, saying they have to do that if they're going to be able to win this one, and they did exactly that. Only 3 yards per carry for this group. Didn't necessarily get to the quarterback too much, didn't have a sack in this game, but was really disruptive and caused problems for Will Howard and definitely caused a lot of problems for that run game, which we talked about was just not going on Saturday. And then Khalil Mullins carrying the load, as he has really all year for this offense, but 32 carries, 116 yards, and a score. That was about all they got offensively for a lot of the game. They got a couple of breaks defensively that put them in really good position. They kicked a couple of field goals, but at the end of the day, it was Khalil Mullins or pretty much nothing else for this Michigan team. I mean, their leading receiver had 1 catch on the day, so it wasn't necessarily a great day offensively, but they did what they do, which is suffocate you defensively and then run the football really effectively. And then they did confuse Will Howard. They got to Will Howard a good bit in this one. Both interceptions were just really head-scratching in. Pushing the ball downfield was just not working in this game. 4 for 10 on passes over 10 yards. He was 6 for 16 when he was pressured. It was a really tough day for Will Howard. Probably his worst performance of the year and probably the worst time to ever do it. So definitely a really tough day for this Ohio State Buckeye team. And where you go from here, I think if you're Michigan, puff your chest out. You have another 365 days to run circles around Ohio State, and you got the Bryce Underwood era on the way. So everything is coming up Michigan right about now. So you just got to go into this offseason, hopefully add a couple of difference makers on the outside, and then really attack next season and see if you can do it for a 5th time in a row. And then if you're Ohio State, you had 3 goals going into this year. It was to beat Michigan, to win the Big Ten, and to win the national title. 2 of those are out the window. With 1 loss, you have lost the Michigan game, obviously, and then the Big Ten championship, they will not be playing in it anymore. So you got to figure out what you're going to do. You got to win that. Pretty much you got to win the national title. I think if they lose in it, then maybe Ryan Day sticks around. But if that 3rd one goes out the window, then it's very likely that Ryan Day goes along with it. So it's going to be interesting to watch this unfold. Not even just this week as Ohio State prepares for the playoff, likely the playoff, but as they get into that game, they might go on the road for that game. How do they handle all of that? It's going to be a really, really interesting thing, and it could be the end of Ryan Day's time at Ohio State. But we got to get into this one as well really quickly. Miami falls to Syracuse and falls out of likely the CFP, if I'm being totally honest. And it's funny because it's usually Miami coming back from a little bit of a deficit. Syracuse was down 21-0 early in this game, rallied back, and then it was kind of just a quarterback duel towards the end of this one. Cam Ward went for nearly 350 and 2 scores. Kyle McCord kind of one-upped him with 380 and 3 scores. So these guys were really, really incredible. We knew that they were going to be coming into this game. Just a couple more mistakes for Miami. The big one being Xavier Restrepo's fumble that led to Devin Grant's touchdown going the other direction, and it definitely put them in a weird position. It put them back in catch-up mode because they had just gotten a fumble from Syracuse. They had just gotten that turnover that it felt like they were waiting for, felt like they were really needed in this game, and then they gave it right back. And Syracuse took it back for a score, and now Miami was back in catch-up mode, and they just didn't have quite enough in the tank. And I think the big thing here, not necessarily the big thing, but as the finishing part of this game, I don't think it was the right idea to kick a field goal in that moment for Miami. The way Syracuse offense was rolling in, LaQuint Allen is a problem to get on the ground. I probably wouldn't have pulled the trigger there. I probably would have gone for the touchdown there and tried to be able to tie this game. The worst you do is you put them on the 10-yard line. You probably get pretty good field position coming back the other direction if you can get a quick stop. But I just thought that was a rather weird decision. Given the flow of the game, given the way Syracuse was moving the ball, I felt like it probably was the better decision to go for a score, and obviously they didn't get the ball back. So definitely a really, really tough situation for Mario Cristobal and Miami, and how Syracuse was able to get this done. I mean, there were a lot of mismatches on the back end, and it's something that's been kind of plaguing Miami this entire year, and it really came back to bite them in this one because Trevor Pena, Jackson Meeks were absolutely incredible. Both went for over 100 yards. Both had a score. In fact, Jackson Meeks had 2. He was an absolute problem. And then you had LaQuint Allen, you had Oronde Gadsden, you had tons of guys on the outside that were just kind of adding to the mix. it was an absolute drubbing for this back end from Miami, where it's been a problem the entire year, and you faced a team that can really throw the rock around. They absolutely did on Saturday. And then you kind of took the hit early. You go down 21-0 in a game that Miami really badly needs. You obviously really want it, but you don't necessarily need it. Would have been very easy to kind of roll up, say, okay, we'll get to a little bowl game. We'll see if we can get to 9 wins and kind of salvage this year. They handled that. Their defense was able to get a couple of stops in a row. They get 21 points back, and then you're right back in it, and you're playing on even footing, and then you get your foot out in front towards the end of the day, and Miami just did not really have an answer when that happened. And then kind of finishing the job. There were a lot of different things that happened in this game. I mean, Syracuse didn't even really run the ball all that effectively in this game before the very last drive. They went 8 plays that were all runs, 46 yards, and ate up almost the final 4 minutes of the clock. Really incredible job from an offense that was kind of tossing the ball around, wasn't necessarily going too aggressively in the run game, was able to kind of switch gears and say, we're going to run the ball now. LaQuint Allen's going to lead us to victory, and he absolutely did. He finished this off, and it was a really impressive performance from Syracuse, and it puts Miami in a really weird spot moving forward for the CFP, because I frankly think they're on the outside looking in. I think for Syracuse, an incredible year for Fran Brown in year one. I mean, 9-3 is incredible, and a huge upset win to kind of finish it off. This feels like a program that's moving in the right direction. It feels like one that can build into something that could be really, really fun to watch. I don't necessarily know how long they'll be at the top of the ACC or if they're going to be able to, compete for it in 2025. I know they're going to be a problem for quite some time, because Fran Brown is not someone that is going to let his guys show up unprepared, and they definitely didn't on Saturday. Got a huge win, and then for Miami, you're on the bubble, and the way that I see it right about now is you're with the loser of the ACC championship. You better hope that it's probably Clemson if that's the case, and then you have Alabama and then Ole Miss. In my eyes, you got to just cross your fingers and hope you're on top tomorrow. I would be a little bit surprised if you were, but maybe you are. They've been ranking you pretty high in these rankings the last couple of weeks. Maybe you get the benefit of the doubt again. Maybe you're ahead of those teams, and maybe you're in the field as a 2-loss team. I'd be a little bit surprised, but maybe there's an opening there for them to kind of jump at. But it was an incredible thing to watch. Ohio State falling once again to Michigan, putting their season in a very weird place where you're not going to the Big Ten championship. You're going to the playoff likely, but maybe traveling on the road to a place like Neyland Stadium. Going to be really tough, no doubt about that. And I think you're in a position where as long as you don't go to the national title, you're probably looking for a new head coach. And then for Miami, I think you have a lot of questions. There's no doubt about that. You had an incredible year. Cam Ward's likely going to New York City for the Heisman ceremony, and you come up short again. Just a little bit short of the ACC championship. Have yet to win an ACC championship in their history in the conference. And you got a lot of questions to ask, no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, you'll just hope that you're in the CFP, and then maybe hope for a little bit of chaos that lets you in a championship weekend. But definitely a missed opportunity for Miami as well as Ohio State. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, we got to talk about 2 big-time ranked matchups. We'll talk about Texas getting a huge win in the rivalry that was renewed in College Station, as well as South Carolina winning the Palmetto Bowl and putting them kind of on that bubble with Miami and Alabama and a lot of other teams. But we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Ohio State going down to Michigan as well as Miami falling to Syracuse, two teams that put them in really weird spots. They're both out of their conference championships. Miami might be out of the CFP. Definitely a lot of questions around those two programs as they move forward, but let's talk about some two big-time ranked rivalry matchups that we got this weekend, and we'll start with that one that happened down there in College Station, and a huge one. A renewed rivalry in this one, Lone Star Showdown, and Texas does get the win, and it was the defense that did it once again. This Texas defense, I tend to believe, is the best in the country, and they absolutely proved that on Saturday. 248 total yards for A&M, 3 yards per carry, 2 turnovers in this game, including the sealing fumble from Marcel Reed. Remarkable stuff from this Texas defense, really all over the place. And one of the other glaring parts of this game was the run game for Texas. It was really incredible. 243 yards in this game on the ground, and Trey Wisner led the way. 186 yards on 33 carries. Insane stuff from that guy, and you saw him on the bike at the end of the day. He was very tired. Let's just leave it at that. But huge shout out to this offensive line, including Trevor Gooseby. He came in for an injured Kelvin Banks. We'll see what happens with that in the SEC Championship. And really incredible player, one of the best tackles in the entire country. But you wouldn't have told. Trevor Gooseby came in. It didn't feel like anything really changed for this Texas offense. Felt like they had another top 10 pick in that left tackle spot, and maybe they do in Trevor Gooseby in a couple of years. But really remarkable stuff from the entire offensive line, and they kind of controlled the day, really from start to finish. And really, the other wrinkle that they added that really helped that was Arch Manning running the ball was a huge factor. With Quinn Ewers on kind of a hobbled ankle, a little bit of an ankle sprain, they did a great job of kind of introducing that to the game plan. Definitely something that I expect to see quite a bit against Georgia, because we saw what Haynes King was able to do. Arch Manning is absolutely someone that can do stuff like that, so it's going to be interesting to watch that unfold throughout the rest of the year. But definitely a fun wrinkle that I think really helps this run game and helps you with those 3rd and 2s, those 4th and 2s, those moments where an extra guy in the box, an extra little bit of confusion definitely does help that a little bit. But for Quinn Ewers, for the starting quarterback in this game, a couple of mistakes really sullied what was a really great performance. Going into halftime, I felt like that second quarter was about as good as we've seen Quinn Ewers play this entire year. Included a 26-yard run, which is very weird with the injured ankle and all, but at the end of the day, really good performance overall. Obviously, the tipped pass that ended up into an interception, pick six the other direction, that kind of gave A&M a little bit of life that it felt like they just did not have in this game. He did have a fumble when he was sliding down, and then a blocked punt kind of put Texas defense in some really tough spots. They responded with some great stops, including the one on the goal line at the end where A&M probably should have taken the points. If I'm being totally honest there, especially taking the timeout and then not taking the points is an interesting decision at the very least. But at the end of the day, it was a really remarkable performance from this Texas defense. They were all over the place. They absolutely slowed everything down, and a 10-point win when you score 17 points is pretty impressive. And it's coming off a game against Arkansas where you scored 20 points and you won by 10. So this defense is incredible. It's going to be a problem for absolutely every team, and I think Texas can play this game over and over and over again and probably win a national title. With the defense that they play, with the run game that they've developed with Trey Wisner and that offensive line, they're going to be a problem for absolutely everyone that they play. And it's not going to be a game where it has to be Quinn Ewers taking over. It has to be this offense scoring 45, 50 points. They can score 17, and they can beat you by double digits on the road in Kyle Field. Really remarkable stuff. And I think it's one of those testaments to the program that's been built, the way that's been built up, and the people that they have in that building. Because Trey Wisner is not a guy that I think a lot of people were circling at the beginning of the year. He obviously stepped up huge in this one and became a legend, and now Texas has bragging rights for at least 365 days. They control this rivalry once again, and it was really just great to see those two teams on the field once again, because it was a special one, no doubt about that. But how Texas was able to pull this off, the defensive domination was very real. 2 turnovers forced, multiple fourth down stops, including that one on the goal line, a long carry of 5 yards for the A&M running backs. They were all over the place. Marcel Reed made a couple of plays with his legs. They had a couple of deep passes early in the game. that was about it for this entirety of the game for that offense. The Texas defense just was all over the place, was absolutely suffocating, and made life an absolute nightmare for Marcel Reed in this offense. And then the run game was rolling. 33 carries, 186 yards for Trey Wisner. The offensive line absolutely pushed people around. And then you got a little bit of Arch Manning. You got one touchdown from Arch Manning around the edge where he showed just how athletic that kid is and how dangerous he can be in the run game. And then you won the margins. In a game like this where you have so many things working against you, from the crowd to a lot of the different outside factors, winning those margins is huge. And they had 35 less penalty yards. They were better on third down. They were better on fourth down. They won the time of possession by 10 minutes. They won the margins, and it was huge to kind of keep that margin down the stretch of the game where it felt like there was moments where it could slip away. It felt like if A&M had to drive more than about 50 yards for a touchdown, they probably weren't going to be able to do it. I mean, they had to drive 20 yards for that final touchdown. They couldn't quite do that. So really remarkable stuff from this Texas team, particularly the defense. And where they go from here, I think for A&M, it was a disappointing finish to a really promising year. I think 8-4, if you were coming into this year and I told you 8-4 is how you're going to finish, you had to feel relatively good about that. I think Mike Elko still has this thing moving in the right direction. You need offensive game changers, and it looks like they might just get one in Jerome Miles in a couple of days, and we'll break all that stuff down in the coming week with early signing day on Wednesday. But at the end of the day, they need some offensive game changers. But outside of that, it feels like a program that's heading in the right direction, just didn't quite have the firepower offensively to hold up against Texas. For Texas, this was the period on this regular season. No doubt about that. You're off to Atlanta in year one, and you get to avenge the one loss you have on your schedule for Georgia. So this program just continues to prove itself, continues to prove that they are quote-unquote back, and now they'll try to prove it in Atlanta at the end of this week, and it'll be a really fun game to watch. No doubt about that. One of those games that was an incredible game in the regular season. I feel like both teams have gotten better since that moment, so it's going to be really fun to watch that one unfold. But Texas rolls on 11-1 in the regular season into the SEC title in their very first year. And then you had the Palmetto Bowl, and South Carolina kind of escaped in this one. It was Lenora Sellers once again making plays pretty much all over the place. Really one of the most impressive players down the stretch of this season in the entire country. And the run game in general for South Carolina has been elite all year. It was elite on Saturday. 268 yards on 41 carries, a long of 38 for Lenora Sellers in this game, and really kind of controlled the pace in a game that was a little bit up and down at times, a little all over the place, and the defenses were kind of controlling the day for much of it. Being able to control the pace, being able to control the line of scrimmage was huge, and South Carolina did that pretty much the entire day. Now, Clemson was not really able to sustain drives. It was one of those situations where they had 4 passes beyond 20 yards, didn't really sustain anything in terms of getting the ones on the big downs and third down and fourth down, weren't very efficient on passing downs, were just a little bit out of sync when it comes to the pass game. Hit a couple of big plays early, but didn't necessarily sustain that over the entire day. And a remarkable final drive from South Carolina on the other side, where the offensive woes were very prevalent in this game, obviously from the score 17-14. But at the end of the day, they had a really, really impressive final drive. Only one negative play, only one penalty, but was pretty much flawless other than that. And then had a just ridiculous touchdown run from Lenora Sellers to finish that thing off. Shows just how special of an athlete that he is. And on the other side of the ball, we talked about that D-line coming into the day against a rather injured Clemson offensive line. Only 1 sack on the day, but they were very disruptive. They got pressure pretty much every single down, caused all types of issues, forced 2 turnovers, including just a ridiculous pick from Demetrius Knight at the very end of this game. But really, really incredible stuff from a South Carolina defense that continues to prove that it's one of the very best teams defenses in the entire country, and Lenora Sellers continues to prove that you do not want to see this guy in a one-game scenario, and that's something to talk about. You know, what happens with South Carolina after this game? Now, the good news for Clemson is you're in the ACC title. With Miami's loss, you are in the ACC title, and now you just got to go beat SMU, and you're in the playoffs. So it hurt you a little bit, no doubt about that. No at-large bid in any future for Clemson, but absolutely still very much in the CFP conversation. For South Carolina, I think you're in a really tough spot. I'll be totally honest with you. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a position that you're going to love to be in on when tomorrow's rankings come out, but we'll see what happens. And first of all, let's talk about what happened in this game and how South Carolina was able to get this one done. Lenore Sellers was incredible, and he's been incredible for the past 6 weeks, and I think he's probably going to be incredible in whatever bowl game they play, whether it's CFP or otherwise. But 330 total yards, more on the ground than rushing, or more on the ground than passing, but very much even both ways. 2 touchdowns in this game, a couple of mistakes here and there, but definitely took over late and played really, really incredible football down the stretch of this game. And then talking about that, kind of finishing the job was huge in this one. Only 7 points and 3 turnovers in the first 9 drives of this game. Then they finished it with back-to-back scoring drives, including 9 plays, 75-yard touchdown drive to finish this thing off. Really incredible stuff. I mean, Lenore Sellers took over, and it was one of those things where it felt like that offense had absolutely nothing to give, and then they just all of a sudden flipped a switch. It's a huge moment for them and definitely shows just how incredible this team has been down the stretch of the season, where they can kind of just flip a switch whenever they need to. And then took away the conventional runs. You know, there's so much stuff that Clemson likes to do. The reality is it all starts with Phil Maffa. If he's not going to be able to get rolling, then this run game is going to struggle. They're not going to be able to do the things in the pass game that they like to do. And it was really Cade Klubnik leading the way pretty much the entire day. Had 62 carries for 10 yards. Outside of him, it was 77 carries for 77 yards for 22 carries. Really remarkable stuff from this defensive line, and definitely got Cade Klubnik got away a couple of times, but at the end of the day was able to handle Phil Maffa, and if you're able to do that, you're probably going to beat Clemson most times, at least 9 times out of 10, to be totally honest. But where they go from here, I think for Clemson, you didn't get hurt. Somehow you got helped. At the end of the day, for the CFP race, at least in my mind, you were in the ACC Championship. Miami has lost, so now you just got to play SMU for a possible first-round bye. Insane. But that's what the 12-team playoff is. We'll see what happens with the rankings. Maybe they're not in line for that 12-team for that one bye. Maybe they're in a position where even if they win, they would be behind the Big 12. So a lot of questions to be asked, no doubt about that. But definitely one of those things where they're still very firmly in this thing. They're still very firmly in the CFP race. Just got to win one game against SMU. For South Carolina, I just think you're going to be the what if. And I hate to say it because I've really enjoyed watching South Carolina this year. Lenore Sellers is a guy that I think is going to be an absolute star in 2025. But you did lose to Alabama. You did lose to Ole Miss. And I still think it's going to be a program that's going to be really fun to watch the rest of the way. But I just don't think there's going to be enough spots for South Carolina to make it into the field. We'll see what happens in the rankings tomorrow, but I don't think it necessarily bodes all that well for the Gamecocks, and I think those 2 losses to Bama and Ole Miss are probably going to do them in at the end of the day, especially that Ole Miss loss, at least if I had to imagine. But going to be interesting to watch those 2 teams unfold the rest of the way. Obviously, both going into their championships. You know, Clemson coming out on the wrong side this week, but coming out on the right side in their conference championship. Texas obviously moving on to the SEC title, and we'll see what happens in that rematch against Georgia. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, we got some rivalries of the weekend. We got to get into a remarkable 8 overtime game against Georgia and Georgia Tech. We got Notre Dame, USC. We got Bama. We got Oregon. Got to talk about them all right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about 2 huge ranked rivalry matchups. We had Texas punch their ticket to the SEC Championship in that renewed rivalry in College Station, and then South Carolina gets a huge win in the Palmetto Bowl, but it seems like Clemson got the win in terms of the CFP race because they are on their way to the ACC title game. A crazy way to finish the season, but that's the 12-team playoff for you. Absolutely insane all over the place. But let's get into some big-time rivalries this past weekend, and we'll talk about one that went to 8 overtimes, and that was absolutely insane to watch. Almost the longest game in college football history in terms of overtimes, although think it's a little bit tainted with the new overtime rules, but this was insane. Pretty much start to finish, it was absolutely insane. Georgia Tech controlled this really from the first half. They dominated this game. They were up 17-0. Georgia had absolutely no answer defensively. Haynes King was running all over the place, and he really did that pretty much the entire day, to be totally honest with you. But especially in the first half, Georgia Tech was totally dominating. They were all over Georgia, and even late into this game, they were up 14 with about 4 minutes left. Fans started to leave the stadium. There were Georgia fans that decided they were done with this game. They felt like Georgia Tech was going to win it. And then Georgia storms back. They were down 14, and Carson Beck made some big-time throws. He went for almost 300 yards and 5 touchdowns in this game. Made an incredible throw to Dominic Lovett at the very end of it to get them back in it to tie the game. With about a minute left, and really remarkable stuff from Carson Beck towards the end of this game, and a point where really felt like Georgia was dead in the water. It felt like they're down 14 against a team that has run the ball really, really effectively. Felt like this game was pretty much over. Georgia was able to battle back. Carson Beck made some huge plays, and they find a way back into it, force overtime, and then the chaos had just started. It was absolutely insane down the stretch of this one. Do want to give a huge shout out to Haynes King. He really battled through this one. It felt like he had multiple injuries in this game. He was gimpy getting off the field multiple times, came in with a shoulder problem, a lot of issues, but threw for 303 yards, 2 scores through the air, 110 and 3 scores on the ground. He was incredible. Really all day. He was the entire offense for Georgia Tech, and especially with Jamal Haynes struggling from an injury, he was really the entire offense for Georgia Tech. He was absolutely incredible, and one of those guys that it shows you just how incredible that kid is and how much he means to that program that has really shown itself over the last little bit, and I think is going to be really special in the coming years. But overtime is a problem. It's the second straight week that we've been proven that this is the wrong way to decide a winner. It was all over the place. There was not very good execution towards the end of this game. It didn't feel like the right way to finish this game by any means. So we got to figure that out one way or the other. I've heard some different ideas. I heard one from Scott Van Pelt that I thought was interesting, starting at the 50. I heard another one that was starting at the 30, then the 20, then the 10. There's a lot of different ideas. We got to figure out one. We got to move forward with one just better than this one. The 2-point conversion way of going about business is just not the right way. But where do they go from here? I think for Georgia Tech, you're building something. There's no doubt about that. Brent Key has his guys ready every single time they go out on the field, no matter who's on the other sideline. They've shown that the 2 years against Georgia. They showed that against Miami earlier this year. They're a really remarkable team, and I think they're going to be a program that's going to be a problem the rest of the way. Obviously not an ideal finish to this regular season, but you get a bowl game, and then you really get rolling. The recruiting is going incredibly well for this program right now, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday. They might have the best offensive line class in the entire country. So a lot of stuff to talk about with Georgia Tech in the coming years, and I think a program that's going to be a problem for Georgia in the coming years. And then for Georgia, this was huge. There's no doubt about that. I don't think there's a world where you miss the CFP at this point. I think you were very much in. I think you're probably hosting a game, regardless of the results in the SEC title. Obviously, want to win that game, but at the end of the day, they're firmly in at this point, and if they lost this game, felt like their season came down to next week. Now it doesn't. Feels like they're firmly in the field. We'll see what happens in that game and where it kind of fits them into the field. But at the end of the day, a huge win. They escape with one and move on to likely the CFP, at least the SEC championship for the time being, and then likely the CFP right after that. And then we had Notre Dame. They were able to kind of escape this one. Obviously, they won by 14, won relatively comfortably at the end of the day, but this one was close. Only about 4 minutes left. USC was driving down 7, and then Christian Gray made an incredible play on the goal line, ran it back 99 yards, went up by 14, and then Xavier Watts just decided to add one on, took back 100 yards to the house to one-up Christian Gray just a little bit there. They end up winning this game by 14 in relatively comfortable fashion at the end of the day. Although it was a little bit sweaty there for a second, they were able to handle business, get out with another win, and this run game is really incredible. I mean, Jadarian Price went for 12 carries, 111 yards. You had Jeremiah Love, 13 carries, 99 yards. You had Riley Leonard, 12 carries, 50 yards. If that is the unit that they're going forward with the rest of the year, it's kind of like Texas. If you're going to be able to run the ball that effectively, if you have a defense that's going to be able to take the ball away like that, you're going to be a problem for just about anyone that you match up with, and especially with them almost definitely, I think pretty much assuredly, getting a home playoff game, you're in a really, really good spot. And that NIU loss, you've been able to get through it. You've been able to battle through it, win out the rest of the way, and now you're in a position where you're definitely going to be hosting a spot. I think they'll probably fit into that 6th seed, but we'll see what happens in the SEC Championship. Maybe if Texas loses, that flips around just a little bit. But at the end of the day, they're in. After the week 2 where it felt like there was no chance that they were going to be able to get back into this thing, they handled business. They won out the rest of the way, and I firmly believe they're going to be hosting a team, and it's going to be a really tough out for just about anyone. When you can run the ball that effectively, when you have a defense like that, you're going to be a problem for just about every single team. Where do they go from here? I think for USC, very confusing. It was a really up and down year. The recruiting is very up and down with it. You're 6-6, and Lincoln Riley's job is a question. At the very least, you're very confused about what the future holds there. The NFL has given him some looks. It's going to be an interesting offseason. I'll leave it at that for the time being. We'll keep you updated with all the stuff at USC, but as of now, I'm very confused about what USC moves forward with. I think the defense is moving in the right direction. Can it move that way quickly enough is kind of the question that I have. For Notre Dame, you just got to watch the rest of the country this weekend. It's a position that you've been in multiple different times. At least now you're in the CFP for the first time in quite a while. You were back in that dance, and now you got to prove people wrong. There's going to be a lot of people picking against you in this game or in whatever game you play pretty much. We'll see how they're able to react. When you have that run game, it's going to be a problem for a lot of teams. But moving forward to the Iron Bowl, Alabama was relatively able to handle business with minimal sweat. I'll put it that way. But at the end of the day, they did give up the ball quite a few times, gave Auburn just about every chance they possibly could have wanted to win this game. Auburn just never took one. And it was Jalen Milroe's legs that got Alabama to the finish line. 17 carries, 104 yards, 3 scores for him. He's incredible. That's what he does well. That's what this team does well. Pretty much when he's not running the ball, it's a relatively benign offensive attack. When he's running the ball, it's terrifying in every way. So it's going to be interesting to watch them move forward. We'll talk about their CFP hopes here in a second, but look pretty good after the crazy Saturday that we had. For Auburn, when you're not able to get the run game going, you're not going to be successful. Jarquez Hunter only had 56 yards in this game. The pass game just can't be quite that dangerous. They got a couple of plays downfield to Cam Coleman and a couple of the other special receivers, but if you're not going to get Jarquez Hunter going, then it's going to be an offense that's relatively easy to slow down. Not necessarily all that easy because of the outright aliens they have on the outside, but a lot easier than it was if you have Jarquez Hunter really running the ball very effectively, and then you have the guys on the outside making those big plays. But Alabama really kept Auburn in this game in a lot of respects. 2 fumbles from Jalen Milroe, a Ryan Williams fumble, an interception from Jalen Milroe. They were a little bit all over the place, and it absolutely will not fly when you go on the road in the CFP, which it looks like they're going to do. And all the craziness of yesterday, it feels like this is the team that's going to end up winning out. We'll see what happens tomorrow, but at least my gut feeling is that this is going to be the team likely on top of the mountain, and then you'll have Miami, you'll have Ole Miss, you'll have South Carolina, those teams kind of right behind them. We'll see what happens in the rankings, obviously, but feels like Alabama's in a relatively good spot. But they get the win with a ton of mistakes. The defense came up huge with a couple of interceptions. Milroe and the run game were downright incredible, and Bama's at least back in the CFP conversation. We'll see what happens on Tuesday, but at the end of the day, I'd be a little bit surprised. That says 38, doesn't 28. Alabama did not roll in this game. They won 28-14. Apologies for that, but really remarkable stuff from this Alabama team. They were able to win, and they move forward to possibly the CFP. For Auburn, this offense is one of those things that you got to get rolling at some point. This offseason is as big for Auburn as it really is for anyone around the country. They're probably going to bring in a quarterback one way or the other. They have Deuce Knight coming in from this recruiting class, remarkable players on the outside. There's a lot of things to like about this team. Going into 2025, if you don't hit on that quarterback, then all this stuff could go down in flames. 2025 could be a very special year for Auburn. Could be relatively disastrous and could lead to Hugh Freeze losing his job, and then you're back at square one. So a lot of things going into this offseason, a huge year for Auburn this offseason. And then for Alabama, you won, and a lot of things went your way. Let's be totally honest, with Miami losing, with Ohio State even going down, a lot of things kind of helped you out just a little bit here, and I think they'll be at the top. I can't promise that they're going to be at the top of that bubble at the end of the day, but I tend to believe that they're probably going to be that 11 seed when they reveal the rankings tomorrow, and a lot of people are going to be very angry in a hurry. But Moving forward to this final one, we got to talk about Oregon-Washington really quickly here. Oregon takes care of business relatively comfortably at the end of the day and finishes the regular season as the only undefeated team in the FBS. Really special year for the Ducks, and they were able to kind of get that monkey off their back. Dan Lanning had not beaten Washington. He was 0 for 3 against this team. He was able to do that. They go on to the Big Ten Championship, and they're actually playing Penn State, which we'll get to that game here in a second right after the break, but going to be an incredible game to watch, no doubt about that. And the run game really led the way for Oregon in this one. 34 carries, 226 yards, 5 scores in the run game, and really remarkable stuff. When you can do that, even Washington, a very, very stout front, a good group, especially at linebacker, being able to handle the front at least to that degree, really impressive, and we'll see what they can do against a Penn State front that is downright terrifying. And as good as that side of the ball was, as good as the run game was, the D-line was a whole lot better. 10 sacks in this game, 16 tackles for loss. They were all over the place. And Damon Williams Jr. did not necessarily make a big mistake in this one, but he obviously took quite a few sacks in this one. And it's kind of just one of those things, made his very first start, and he was relatively good. I think went 17 for 20, so was very good completing the ball. Maybe should get rid of the ball a couple more times. Maybe should throw the ball away in a couple of those instances. But at the end of the day, was under fire the whole game. I think handled it relatively well. And they were only able to get 43 yards on the ground on 37 carries. So obviously not all of it is on him by any means. So this is huge for Oregon in so many different ways. You're able to get kind of that monkey off your back with Washington. You move to Indianapolis in your very first year, and you take on Penn State. See if you can knock down another Big Ten power in this year. And then you were able to knock down Michigan. You were able to knock down Ohio State. Maybe Indiana you'll find in the playoff. But as of right now, you move your focus to Penn State. And where they go from here, I think for Washington, I think it was a rather successful year. Obviously, 6-6 after a playoff berth is not necessarily ideal, but a lot of people left. I think they replaced about 40 guys on that team. Damon Williams looks like a very fun player, and I think can be really good in the coming years. Obviously, going to be a big offseason in terms of the portal and bringing in certain guys, but as of right now, I feel pretty good about this program moving forward under Jedd Fisch. Need to scale up a little bit, but definitely a team that feels like they're going to find their way into the Big Ten conversation, at least in 2025. For Oregon, you're the team. There's no two ways about that. You are going to be either the 1 seed or the 5 seed in the CFP. You're probably going to be one of the favorites, maybe the favorite, to win the entire thing. It's just about handling business. It's just about handling all of the craziness of being the top team and all of this, and handling a Penn State team that is going to be a load. There's no doubt about that. So going to be really fun to watch what this team can do the rest of the way, I think. With a lot of these teams, there's so many different teams in this last segment where you have Georgia that has been very, very up and down this year, but when they play that top level, they can win a national title. Notre Dame's a team that I think a lot of people are still very skeptical about, but they're playing really good football and can run the ball and play defense with anyone in the country. Alabama's one of those teams, kind of like Georgia, that when Jalen Milroe is running the ball, it's very, very scary. Otherwise, and they're making mistakes like that, you're definitely up in the air, but it feels like they might have gotten back into the CFP race. And then you do have Oregon, the team that's dominated the entire year. They look to dominate next week and get that 1 seed and probably move into this thing as the outright favorite to win the entire thing. But let's take our third break here. We'll get into a little bit of a Power 4 roundup at the end of this. We'll get into Penn State, Tennessee, SMU, a lot of teams that handled business relatively comfortably this past weekend and was able to move on to their conference title game, to the CFP, to whatever holds next, and definitely a lot of things to update you on that we'll get into right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that couple of big-time rivalries from this past weekend. Georgia just survived. Notre Dame was able to handle business, likely going to the CFP. Bama right back into that CFP conversation, and Oregon handled business like the number 1 team in the country, like they are. So definitely a lot of interesting stuff there. And now we got to talk about the mess in the Big 12. We got to talk about a lot of big-time games from the Power 4 this past weekend, and we'll start with one team that took the opportunity that was given to them. Ohio State opened the door, and they sprinted through it. Penn State was able to handle business against Maryland 44-7 after a fumble from Nick Singleton on play 1, and then a touchdown from Caden Prather on play 2. It was all Penn State in this game. They totally dominated this one. The defense continues to improve throughout this year, allowed under 200 yards in this game, forced 3 INTs, and got home 6 times for sacks. Really incredible stuff, and when you have an Oregon attack coming in next week, you got to feel pretty good about that defense right about now. If they can slow this run game down the way they did Maryland and the way they did a lot of teams, going to be a really, really fun game to watch. But a huge performance that puts them in the Big Ten championship, and now you just got to see if you can shock the world, sort of. I think a lot of people had written off Penn State in terms of they're probably going to get into the CFP, but probably lose their first round or second round game, not necessarily have the year that they want. Now they're going to Indianapolis, and they have every single chance to win that game, possibly be the 1 or 2 seed in this thing, and then we'll see what happens for Penn State. A lot of doors were opened on Saturday, and they handled their business. Ohio State didn't. Now they get to face off against Oregon and see if they can etch their name and get that bye into the CFP. Then we had Tennessee. This was kind of a similar story to Penn State. Not quite the domination that Penn State had, but Tennessee went down 14-0 very early in this game. We had a kick return on the opening kickoff from Junior Sherrill for a touchdown, and then you had a fumble that kind of put him in a hole, and Vanderbilt was able to score off that. Then Tennessee just took over. They totally took over in this game, and the biggest one that they found was the pass game. It felt like this team got a little bit more dangerous in the pass game. Nico Iamaleava was very, very sharp in this game. Dante Thornton made the plays that he can make, where he just kind of takes the ball on a post and goes 86 yards for a touchdown. Did that one, scored another, I believe, 26, 28-yarder. Really incredible stuff. And then when you have Dylan Sampson running the ball the way he did, I think he had 177 yards in this game. You're going to do a lot of special things on offense. So maybe that last thing just clicked. Tennessee's feel like a team that we've been waiting for quite some time to find that last little click, find that last little gear. Maybe they finally did. Maybe that pass game is in play now, and if it is, I think there's a team that could possibly challenge for a national title. They're pretty firmly in the CFP field as far as I'm concerned. I think they're likely hosting a game. I think that Ohio State loss puts them in a very good position. We'll see what happens. We'll see how far Ohio State drops down the rankings, but at the end of the day, they're in a really good spot and definitely a team that could be scaling at the very right moment. SMU was able to handle business and not really get any sweat in this game. They won 38-6 against Cal, and it was one of those games where they didn't necessarily have to win it. Now you're in a much better position when it comes to a CFP at-large bid. A lot of people are already talking about Bama beating them out at 11-2. I would not be part of that group. I can absolutely promise you that. If they're an 11-2 team, I would firmly have them in the field. I don't think as many people would. So we'll see what happens in the rankings tomorrow. But at the end of the day, I think SMU is still in a relatively precarious situation for the CFP. But as for this game, Brashard Smith totally took over. 16 carries, 68 yards, and a score on the ground. 3 catches, 66 yards, and a score receiving. He was remarkable. Pretty much the entire day, he took over this game, and Cal just had absolutely no answer, especially without Fernando Mendoza at quarterback. The offense just could not keep up with what SMU was doing. So SMU, I think they should be in regardless. I think regardless of what happens, maybe if they get blown out in the ACC championship, we're having a different conversation, but the one loss is being BYU, and they're in a position to play for their conference title. If we're going to punish them for that, then I think we're doing the wrong thing. But at the end of the day, I think they're in a precarious situation. I think the loser of that ACC championship, if it is SMU, would be kind of on that bubble with Alabama, with Ole Miss, with South Carolina, with Miami, and you just have to figure it out. At the end of the day, I would put them in, but I can't promise the same thing for the CFP committee. But they finish their season, they move on to the ACC title, and they could leave all doubt out of it by beating Clemson and getting that possibly a bye at that 3 spot where they are right now. And then Indiana, they put a period on this season, an exclamation point on this season against their rival, and it led to the firing of Ryan Walters. Purdue is going to be looking for a new head coach, one of those programs that is very, very hard to win at. Jeff Brom did an incredible job there. That's why he's at Louisville right now. But at the end of the day, going to be interesting to see which way they go. I think there's plenty of great options around the country. going to be a relatively hard sell. But we'll update you on all the coaching carousel stuff tomorrow. But I think Indiana getting this one, they're in a really good position now. Obviously, they're firmly in the field. I don't think that's a question. I think they're probably traveling for their very first game in the CFP. We'll see what happens there. And it's about just kind of proving people wrong. It's just about, proving people that that Ohio State game was just a bad performance. It was just not your best day by any means. And now you're ready to move forward and be in the field and possibly make something happen. We'll see what happens in that one. I think they're probably going to travel. I believe if you take the AP poll, they're the 10 seed and traveling to Georgia. Obviously not an easy thing by any means, but the up and down nature of Georgia and the way Indiana plays, we'll see what happens in that one. They handle business, and now they move forward to possibly the CFP. They have to watch the Big Ten Championship from their couches, but at the end of the day, going to be a really, really fun team to watch, and one that was one of the best stories of the season. We get to watch it into the CFP. Arizona State was able to handle business and move on to the Big 12 title this past weekend, and they jumped out to a 14-0 lead very early in this one and never looked back. They totally dominated this team from start to finish, an Arizona team that been pretty readily dominated pretty much all year, if I'm being totally honest. So it was one of those things where probably should have been able to handle business like this, and they absolutely did. The offensive attack for Arizona State is special. There's no two ways about that. The second that Jordan Tyson started to become that dangerous player on the outside that he absolutely is capable of being, and he's shown that week over week, they've become as dangerous as really anyone in the country. Cam Scadaboo is one of the best running backs. He has been all year. But Jordan Tyson coming into the fray and becoming a real threat on the outside has totally changed this offense and made them as dangerous as really anyone in the country. They're heading to Arlington and possibly punch their ticket to the CFP. I'll talk about the Big 12 tomorrow, but I think they probably should be getting some more love for two teams getting into this thing, but at the end of the day, Arizona State is firmly into the Big 12 title, and they're going to face off against this Iowa State team that was able to handle business against Kansas State. It was not necessarily all that pretty throughout this game, but Iowa State was able to handle business. They will be joining Arizona State in Arlington, and we'll talk about the game that actually sent them there here in a second, but really good stuff from Rocco Becht. He kind of had an odd day. He only completed 13 of 35 passes. He had 2 touchdowns, didn't turn over the ball, at least from a passing perspective, and handled business at the very least. He got the job done, and they were able to work the ball down the field, make a couple of big-time plays, and that was about it. And Kansas State was a very dangerous team. I mean, they scored, I believe, I can't remember the exact number against Cincinnati, but really exploded. I believe 45 points possibly against Cincinnati, and Iowa State was able to handle that. Iowa State kind of had a weird blip in the middle of the season where they lost to Texas Tech and Kansas. Very talented team. 2 guys on the outside, and Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, that are an absolute problem. The run game has a lot of faces that can be dangerous. A really dangerous team, and definitely if they beat Arizona State, they'll be in the field, and I think it's one of those squads that on the right Saturday can make a lot of things happen against some of these better teams in the country. And then you got BYU. This was the game that actually sent Iowa State to the championship. If BYU were to lose here, it would have been Colorado, and we'll talk about that game here in a second. But Houston was hung around here for a second. It was dangerous there, but BYU was able to get a fumble late in this game. They were able to handle business, finish their year 10-2, and although likely out of the CFP race, a really remarkable year for the Cougars. I think you could argue they shouldn't be out of the CFP race, but we can talk about that tomorrow if we want to. But a less than inspiring performance from this offense. They had a lot of problems, no doubt about that. They gave up 3 turnovers, but they got 4 back. So they were able to do the thing that they've been able to do a lot of weeks throughout the year, and definitely during that streak that they were on, which is win the turnover battle, win the margins of this game, and they were able to do that kind of in a little bit dramatic fashion in this one, but they were able to handle business, and BYU's been so much fun to watch this entire year. Definitely one of those teams that kind of took the world by storm in the college football world, and I think they're in a position where they're almost definitely not getting into the CFP. I think regardless of what happens this weekend, regardless of what happens, maybe if tomorrow they have some crazy change of heart, BYU could find their way in, but at the end of the day, they're going to be out of the field rightfully or not, and 2025 is going to be a very interesting year for BYU. Jake Retzlaff should be back, and we'll see what happens for the Cougars in 2025, but a really special year for them, and definitely was really fun to watch them. And then Colorado, they were able to finish their season in a really remarkable fashion, and it was a remarkable season. And it's not over yet by any means. Deion's made it very clear that his guys are going to play in that bowl game, which you got to admire. Absolutely love that. But Travis Hunter likely has locked up the Heisman. I don't think there was any question going into this game. If there was a question coming out of it, then I question the voters, because he had 10 catches, 116 yards, 3 scores, and a pick just for fun. So really remarkable stuff from from the very best player in the country. LeJontay Wester had 175 yards and a score. Shedeur Sanders had 450 and 5 scores. They were incredible. Offensively, it was business as usual. They barely miss out on the Big 12 title. I mean, the job that Deion has done this year has been truly insane and cannot be overlooked by any respect. I think it's been really remarkable to watch what they've been able to do. A lot of the questions that I had coming into this year were answered and then some. It'll be awesome to watch what this team can do during the offseason, and they got a really special player in Julian Lewis coming in. We'll see what happens in 2025, and we'll see if this thing can continue to scale or they take a little bit of a step back without Shedeur Sanders, without Travis Hunter. It'll be an interesting offseason, as it really always is around Boulder, and we'll see what happens, but definitely a team that's heading in the right direction, and we learned a lot of stuff this past weekend. The Big 12 was handled, at the very least. We do have Iowa State against Arizona State. Penn State was able to punch their ticket to the Big 10 when Ohio State opened the door, and a lot of other stuff that happened throughout this week, but we got to get to the group of 5. We got to talk about a little bit of a roundup from that group. We'll talk about that right after, including Tulane falling out of the mix, the Mountain West Championship maybe being a play-in game for the CFP, and then we'll just update you on all of the other championship games that are happening this upcoming weekend. We'll do that right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some big time games from the Power 4, including the Big 12 has been figured out. It is going to be Arizona State against Iowa State in Arlington this upcoming weekend. Going to be a really, really fun game to watch against two teams that are really dangerous on the offensive side of the ball. I think it's going to be one of those games that could get up and down just a little bit, but we will obviously break that one down throughout this week, but let's get into a little bit of a group of 5 roundup. We got a ton of games I want to talk about here, and we got to start with the one that happened on Thanksgiving night and one that caught me by surprise just a little bit. I bought into all the Tulane hype maybe a little bit too early, but at the end of the day, was a really, really good team, and definitely the team that was threatening for that possible G5 CFP spot and taking it from a possible Boise State or UNLV, and they go down. A really, really tough loss for the Green Wave and puts them in a really precarious situation where you definitely can still play for the American. You're almost definitely out of the CFP race. I don't think there's any question about that, and we'll talk about who likely is in it here in a second. But as good as Mario Anderson was with 177 yards and a score in this game, the other running back, DeRosier was much better in this game. 6 carries, 41 yards and a score on the ground, 8 catches, 84 yards and 2 scores. He was just impossible to stop for Tulane in this game. He totally took over and definitely made all of the plays that Memphis needed in this one. They were able to get it done, get a 10-point win, and now Tulane, you still got the game against Army this upcoming weekend. I believe that's going to happen in Army with this loss Tulane that just suffered, but it was one of those games where it just kind of got away from you. Didn't get the offensive play that you've gotten really all year. Memphis was able to control the pace on the ground, and that was all she wrote. No CFP spot likely on the line with Army and Tulane this upcoming weekend, but still a lot on the line. A huge game in the American Championship, and definitely one that they very badly want to get done and at least kind of salvage the season that was tainted a little bit on Thursday. Then we do have Oregon State, Boise State. Boise State was able to get a relatively quiet win on Friday while all of the craziness was happening around them. They were able to handle business. Ashton Jeanty, as you can imagine, went for over 200 yards and a score. I hate that it's not going to be as close as I think it should be in the Heisman race, but at the end of the day, he's definitely going to NYC and likely will get the respect that he absolutely deserves. But the biggest thing for me was Ashton Jeanty looked a little bit more healthy in this game. He's been struggling with a lot of different injuries all throughout this season. Felt like he had multiple at one point. Felt like he had about 3 at some points, but feels like he's getting a little bit healthier as they're getting to the end of the season. If they can get him fully healthy for that Mountain West Championship and especially into the CFP possibly, could be absolutely huge. Madden Madsen is a good player, definitely a guy that can make some plays here and there, but likely can't carry the load the way that he would need to if Ashton Jeanty was fully down. Feels like he's getting a little bit more healthy. We'll obviously see what happens this weekend, and they're the team to beat in the CFP race for the G5, no doubt about that. It can fall apart this weekend, or this team can keep rolling, and frankly, I'm not doubting number 2 right now. He's absolutely rolling and definitely one of those guys that can totally get into the CFP, and then we'll see what happens from there. One of those guys that can totally change one of those games. But UNLV is the team that they're going to face off against. Colorado State opened the door last week with a loss, and UNLV ran on through it. They win a couple of games, and they get their shot at Boise State to possibly avenge one of the losses they have this year, the other coming to Syracuse, but able to handle business in the Mountain West Championship. You're likely in the CFP. With Tulane's loss, I think the door opens where the Mountain West Championship is just an outright play-in game for the CFP and the Group of 5. Wouldn't have it any other way. Going to be an incredible game, and definitely 2 teams that were really fun to watch the first time around. Cannot wait to watch them this Friday. And then Jaden Thomas has become a huge player for UNLV. 15 carries, 135 yards, and a score in this one. He was absolutely incredible. Haj Malik Williams is running this offense just incredibly efficiently. The defense is really great against the run, which could be huge this upcoming weekend. They're a really dangerous team, and they're set up to avenge one of their losses this week. If they can, they're in the CFP, and then they're in a position where who knows what happens. You're probably the 12 seed. You probably get rid of that, first round bye that Boise State seems to have right now, but you're in a position where you're going on the road to play a game, but that offense is a load to deal with. Maybe they could be a team that could cause some problems for one of those elite teams in the country. Obviously, business is still handle, but they're still back in this conversation, and they're likely playing in the play-in game this upcoming weekend in Boise. Miami of Ohio was able to send their move on to the MAC championship, where they're going to play Ohio. It was a little bit of Battle of Ohio these past couple of weeks for Miami of Ohio. They win the battle against Bowling Green, and Keon Mosey was a huge part of it. 108 yards on the ground, 1 score, and Javon Tracy had a huge play in it. The 72-yard touchdown was kind of what put the game on ice. Felt like Bowling Green didn't have much of anything going offensively, and that was because Harold Fannin only had 8 catches, 47 yards. Really good stuff from this Miami of Ohio defense to hold back one of the very best playmakers in the entire sport, especially at the tight end position. He is definitely one of the guys. He's a finalist for the Mackey Award. Definitely will be a guy that you will see in Sundays coming up for a very long time, if I had to imagine. But Ohio was able to top Ball State this past weekend. It is going to be Miami of Ohio against Ohio in the MAC championship. Should be a fun finish to MACtion this year. It's been an awesome year up in MACtion, and they got the huge win from NIU. Obviously didn't necessarily equate to much wins in conference, but it's been an incredible year, and Miami of Ohio against Ohio will finish it off. A huge rivalry that'll be really, really fun to watch. Jacksonville State and Western Kentucky played a really, really fun game, and a 50-yard field goal game winner from Lucas Carnero sent Jacksonville State to the Conference USA Championship, where they'll play Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State is one of those teams that was sitting really pretty going into this weekend, had not lost in conference. This was their very first, and Western Kentucky actually was able to knock out Sam Houston State, who was another open job, actually. Casey Keeler just got hired somewhere else, and we'll talk about that tomorrow, but definitely something to watch there. Caden Veldkamp was really incredible in this game, 300 yards, really remarkable stuff, where the run game just did not get going much at all. He was able to pick up the slack, had a couple of mistakes here and there, there, including a fumble, but at the end of the day was able to handle business and do the job for Western Kentucky, get them in position, and then Lucas Carnero just handled the rest of it. So the conference championship for the Conference USA will be next week. It'll be between these two teams, and we'll see what happens at the end of the day, but definitely a really remarkable year for Jacksonville State. Tyler Huff did leave this game halfway through it. Definitely something to watch. If he's not healthy, then maybe the door opens a little bit more for Western Kentucky in this game. Going to be incredible to watch, and definitely love the little rematch. You turn right back around and you play the team again. We'll see if Western Kentucky can make it 2 in a row, or Jacksonville State can get a little bit of revenge next weekend. And then Marshall was able to punch their ticket to the Sun Belt Championship, where they'll face off against Louisiana, another team that was relatively comfortable going into this weekend, and they were able to come back from a 17-0 deficit in this game to force overtime and then win it in double overtime. Really incredible stuff, and Marshall was able to edge out Georgia Southern. That was the team they were kind of fighting with, who actually beat them earlier in the year, and they kind of struggled against them. Definitely a team that could have kind of stolen their spotlight. Marshall was able to handle business. Charles Huff has done a really incredible job really the entire year. Braylon Braxton was very solid in this game, and definitely one of these teams that can be really dangerous in a game like this against Louisiana, where it's going to be huge. It's one of those games that isn't going to have anything to do with the CFP race, but I think as we all learned really throughout this entire year is the special part about the sport happens during the regular season, not after it. So it's a really remarkable year for Marshall, and now they get a chance at a possible Sun Belt title. A lot of talk around Charles Huff and some other jobs out there. For the time being, he's handling his conference title. See if they can get to 10 wins and see if they can make this year just a little bit more special than it already is for Marshall. But really remarkable stuff from them, and they're able to handle business a little bit in kind of crazy fashion, but they were able to handle business at the end of the day. And now we have this. We have the conference title matchups that we are going to see this upcoming weekend, and no line is beyond 4.5, which is going to be really fun to watch. But you have Texas, Georgia facing off against each other in Atlanta. Obviously a rematch of the game earlier this year that Georgia pretty much just outright dominated. From start to finish was all over Texas, and we'll see if Texas can kind of get a little bit of revenge there. Oregon looking to see if they can knock off Penn State and 13-0, get that number 1 seed in the CFP. Penn State seeing if they can possibly cause a couple of problems. If they win and Georgia win, that might be your number 1 seed in the CFP at the end of the day. Going to be incredible to watch that one. SMU favored by 2.5 against Clemson. One of those moments where Clemson lost this past weekend, had a really tough week, but with the rules of the CFP, they are firmly in this race. If they win this thing, they're probably in the field. They're might be getting a bye, they might not. We'll see how all this shakes out tomorrow, but going to be interesting to watch that game unfold, and definitely not what we expected going into the weekend. But Miami falls, Clemson steps up, and we'll see what happens there. The Big 12 title between Arizona State and Iowa State, going to be awesome. It was America's conference the entire year. It was back and forth. It was all over the place. I'll actually show you the preseason thoughts and the postseason results. It was all over the place. Arizona State was literally picked to finish last in this conference, and they could very well win it on Saturday. And then in the group of 5, for the Mountain West, you have Boise State, UNLV, another rematch from earlier this year, an incredible game that Boise State was able to eke out. Could be a great spot for UNLV to get a little bit of revenge there. Tulane Army, one that we knew going into this week. Tulane takes a little bit of a hit in the CFP race, so likely not for anything in the CFP, but definitely going to be a really fun game to watch. We'll see if Army can not finish off this year, but at least finish off their conference championship with a win. They have Navy after that, obviously. And then Sun Belt, you have Louisiana against Marshall, going to be a really fun game there. You have Miami of Ohio against Ohio in the MAC. In the Conference USA, Jacksonville State against Western Kentucky. A really fun group of games, no doubt about that. A lot of games that we didn't get to see throughout the year in terms of Oregon, Penn State, SMU, Clemson, Arizona State, Iowa State, Texas, Georgia, we were able to say earlier this year, and it was a really fun one, so cannot wait to see that one again. We have 4 new teams in their conference championships. In fact, Army adds to that. We have 5 new teams in their new conference championships. We have Texas, Oregon, SMU, and Arizona State. All the teams that are favored in this game are new in their conference in the very first year. Really remarkable. It shows just how crazy this year has been, and definitely will be likely a pretty crazy finish if I had to imagine. We'll see what happens in the CFP rankings tomorrow, but as of right now, that'll do it for the regular season. And It was incredible. Probably the most exciting, insane, unpredictable ones of my lifetime. It was all over the place, and I could not get a beat on just about any team. I still am having a tough time getting a beat on some of these teams, and I don't know if there's an elite one out there. Oregon is probably as close as you're going to get. I think Texas is starting to scale in that direction. A couple other teams out there, but as of right now, it's as up in the air as I can ever remember it. You got conference titles, you got the portal, you got early signing day on Wednesday, the CFP, obviously, all on deck. We will cover it all. I absolutely promise you that. It was an incredible regular season. Thank you for everyone for watching and following along, because it's been a lot of fun, no doubt about that, but we got plenty of fun still ahead of us. We will break down all the craziness in the CFP tomorrow. We'll break down some of the job openings, some of the transfer portal madness, and then we got to get to early signing day, and then it's conference championship time. So a lot of different things coming throughout this week, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will be back tomorrow to break down all the craziness of this regular season and try to get an idea of what tomorrow's rankings for the CFP are going to look like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.